St Maud, directed by Rose Glass, was marketed in 2019 as a horror film, though it probably has more in common with what we might call modern expressionist cinema. Alongside Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan, Lars von Trier's Antichrist, or Jennifer Kent's The Babadook, in which the film's aesthetic acts as an extension of a protagonist's deteriorating psychological state, notably female in all these examples. This influence on the film harks back to the great German films of the 1920s, such as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, with a direct line through the 1960s and Repulsion, in which a fragile woman's isolation becomes increasingly catastrophic and her diegetic space distorts in reflection of the decline. St Maud follows in this tradition through tracing its protagonist's increasing isolation and separation from the real world through shifting between extreme high and low camera angles, generally framing her as alone or separated from the other characters through focus or eyeline. The repeated motif of bubbles or swirling liquid also indicates her shifting subjectivity, along with the subtle facial distortions added in post-production to emphasise Maud's more extreme emotional states. St Maud also uses binary opposites to structure its narrative in a way that explores themes of faith, sexuality, and class division. The story itself is straightforward. Maud is a rigidly religious palliative care nurse whose obsession with saving the soul of her patient Amanda leads to tragic consequences. The narrative, however, is rich and complex with a character arc that reveals several themes at play. The film opens with a stark, enigmatic scene that immediately suggests the trauma that will propel the actions to follow. Maud, played by Morpeth Clark, is in a hospital setting, framed tightly at a high angle in the corner, her hands held out. Her face registers shock. The lighting is low contrast and low key, and we are barely able to make out what has happened through the closely framed or oddly angled shots. A patient has died, and the drips on the floor, along with the blood on Maud's face and hands, signify that the death was agonising. Those hands covered in blood and her suppliant gesture suggest the stigmata, and the film's religious motif is already set. Shot reverse shot shows a cockroach crawling across the ceiling. The faintest of reactions from Maud is all that indicates the religious epiphany that this encounter ignites. The briefest of titles and blaring foghorn chord is alarming in its suddenness. This film has a brisk running time and it isn't going to hang about. Next we see hellish red bubbles in close shots. What is this? Diabolical torment? A wider shot reveals something more mundane. Maud is at home in a bleak bedsit warming a tin of tomato soup. Thus the motif of horror bubbling beneath a bland surface is set that will continue throughout. The scalding hot temperature of the soup is also perhaps a foreshadowing of the very final shot. Another long shot from a high angle shows Maud at prayer, and her room is Spartan, bleak, joyless, like the cell of an ascetic nun. She has also shut a window, cutting out the sound from outside. Her interiority and insularity are established. Time has evidently passed since the opening scene, though so far we have no indication how much. In voiceover, she addresses God, but her tone suggests not devotion but a diary entry, listing her painful menstruation and revealing a passive-aggressive impatience that her life isn't more fulfilling. This, and her subsequent journey through a narrow passageway across an empty seafront and up a hill to Amanda's mansion, mostly in long shot, all pick her out as lonely, small and ignored by the world around her. Maud has evidently gotten religion wrong, missing the communality and comforts of shared belief and instead looking to God as a salve to her seclusion. Her beliefs have made her horribly alone. These brief opening scenes indicate that Maud has nowhere to go but up, both from the prone position from her first appearance and from her journey in low in the class order to the saviour that she imagines she will become. Narratively, her trajectory is set. The mansion is our first indication of how binary opposites will play out. High and low class will soon become sacred and profane, faith and doubt, purity and indulgence, salvation and damnation, life and death. We are forced to align with Maud's point of view, primarily because there is nowhere else to go. The camera is frequently positioned to suggest her perspective. Uncomfortably tight framing used throughout the film often emphasises her narrow perspective and exclusion, both of and by the external world. This contrasts with the occasional wider shots that emphasise the tension between her internal viewpoint and her broader surroundings. The setting is Scarborough, the season is clearly winter, thus establishing what should be a lively, vibrant town as a somewhat bleak backdrop that increases Maud's anonymity. Oddly, no one in the film speaks with a local regional accent, further emphasising the social disconnect of the main character, whose Welsh accent sets her slightly apart. Amanda's home is decorated with images of past glories of stage and screen, a life clearly lived to the full, in contrast with Maud's new room, in which she immediately positions a large cross as her only mark of personality. The central binary opposition in St Maud is between Maud and Amanda. Maud values devotion and self-sacrifice, while Amanda represents indulgence and sensuality. Amanda is living while she is dying through passion, while Maud seems to be dying when she should be living through self-harm, denial, and ultimately causing destruction, rather than saving anyone. Crucially and fatally for Amanda, she initially indulges in, then later repudiates Maud's faith, cutting off the one connection that Maud had thought that she had made with another soul. The structuralist Claude Lévi-Strauss suggested that the use of binary opposites are fundamental to how humans shape narratives. We comprehend what is day by understanding what is night, for instance. We use these opposites in order to communicate, forming our understanding and acting as organisers of philosophy, culture and language. Thus, in the play of opposites, whichever emerges as the winner indicates a narrative balance, an equilibrium that seems to complete the narrative. Of course, this is a myth, an artificial framework by which to draw a story to a close, and as a result, highly ideological. Day and night ignores twilight, dusk, etc. Maud's obsessive and increasingly fixated perspective cannot allow her opposite to exist. It is too much for her to face that her own internal conflict is rooted in a struggle between faith and doubt. She notably increases the extremity of her self-harm as the film progresses, and she cannot find a middle ground. Her lapse of faith takes her on a wild bender, drinking to excess and engaging in joyless sexual encounters, rather than in true human communication. She seems at her strangest when she attempts to latch onto and laugh along with the social group in the pub, for instance. It is through the brief appearance of additional characters that we discover that Maud is the identity she has adopted as a coping mechanism for the trauma of that brief opening scene. Offering this helpful exposition comes the wryly named Joy, an ex-colleague who addresses Maud as Katie, and alludes with concern to the events that led to the death glimpsed at the start. Also, through the very briefest of flashbacks, Maud sees her own hands crack through a ribcage of a man she is having sex with. This, and his abusive and humiliating taunting of her, gives us all the exposition that we need. The true binary at play here is that between Katie and Maud. Perhaps a doppelganger motif, which also recalls the German Expressionists of the 1920s. The film's sound design also underscores the oppositions between Maud's perception of the world and what is really happening. Her prayers contrast with the sounds of modern life, conversations and music at Amanda's party, or the sounds of the pub or cafe where Maud finds herself among, yet distant from, her community. The film also uses long, dialogue-free passages built on diegetic sound to evoke her solitude. The sounds of social interactions around Maud are often muted, with amplified sounds such as breathing or distant murmurs magnified to heighten her sense of paranoia. Accordingly, Maud's actions are consciously motivated by a desire to save Amanda's soul, but she is blind to what she really needs, which is to see that the binaries that frame her perception are false, and that Amanda is not truly her opposite. Amanda has clearly understood this, as revealed by her comments at the party that she can't figure out if she, Maud, is a bigot or if she's just jealous. She both teases and apologises to Maud, wanting her to have fun. She's imperious to her, yet also sympathetic. At the party, and again at the film's climax, she contradicts Maud's faith, which results in violence, as Maud will not accept that there is room for ambiguity in herself or others. When Maud hears the voice of God, it is of course a distortion of her own voice speaking Welsh. The false perception of resolution for the binaries of salvation and damnation culminates in Maud's perception that she is saving Amanda, when in reality both are spiralling towards ruin, and the film's climactic sequence is structured around this tension. Maud repeats her initial journey from bedsit to mansion in a duplication of the shot sequence from her first visit. Of course, this time it is night. By this point, the spectator has long been aware of Maud's flawed perception, and our alignment with her is deeply uneasy. She seeks purification and resolution with disastrous, deluded results. Amanda's transformation into a demonic denier of Maud's faith convinces Maud, but not us, that all is resolved. The ecstatic Maud's vision of herself floating away from her crime becomes her only true moment of happiness, though the spectator has long been left behind in sharing this perception. The final sequence is unstinting in exposing Maud's subjectivity while revealing her folly. She is made up to look haggard, unwell. The sound of background voices shouting an alarm breaks through her audio cocoon. Maud has seen herself as a martyr fulfilling her destiny, but her obsessive devotion to her misguided mission has resulted in her undoing, suggesting that the pursuit of purity and salvation can paradoxically lead to destruction when the binaries refuse to fit the ideal. Fittingly, St. Maud ends with the character's self-immolation. She has been self-destructing since the opening scene. The juxtaposition of her angelic martyrdom and the final shot is a fleeting glimpse of realisation at the point of death. Or Is it a vision of a hellish afterlife? Either way, it is a highly unusual, shocking end to this cinematic narrative. Has any other film ended with such a brief final shot?